Hey everyone, Howard Pinsky here with a look at my top 4 features in Photoshop CC 2014. Yes, I'm going with 4 features, not 5, not 6. Most people do 5, I'm doing 4. So, the first feature is Select Focus Area. A lot of times in your photos, you've taken a great photo, but you decide you want the background to be something different. So you want a way to easily select everything that's in focus so you can replace the background with something else. So now under the select menu, we now have a new focus area option. And when you select that, Photoshop is automatically going to start to figure out what's in focus and create a selection just like that. So everything right here that's overlaid in red is the out of focus area. And very similar to Refine Edge, you have additional features in the focus area dialog box. If it didn't do a great job and you want to select a little bit more or a little bit less, you can drag the in focus range slider. You can turn on advanced if you have a little bit of noise in the background, or you can use the tools to the left to add or subtract from the focus area. So for example, over here to the left, I have a little bit of trees, and down at the bottom, there's a little bit of the fence that was selected that Photoshop detected was in focus, but I may want to remove that. So I'm going to select the focus area subtract option. I'm going to increase the size of my brush with my right square bracket key and simply paint very sloppily around this area. And Photoshop is going to notice that, okay, well, maybe they didn't want that area selected, so it's going to remove it. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom over here, and the same thing on the right over here. Of course, if I want to be really picky, I can decrease the size of my brush and paint in the areas around the rope just like this to really remove some of the areas that I don't want selected. And that looks a lot better. Photoshop has done a pretty decent job at selecting the areas of my photo that were in focus. But of course, anytime you're dealing with hair or fur, especially around this little monkey, you may want a little bit more control. So the focus area dialog box allows you to open Refine Edge with one click. And within Refine Edge, which I've done a lot of videos in the past on, you can turn on Smart Radius, increase the radius a little bit, and Photoshop is going to automatically start to pick out those hairs that weren't selected initially and give you a much nicer, cleaner looking result. If I turn the original on and then turn it back off, you're going to notice it's a lot softer around those edges. And I can increase the radius a little bit more to grab some of the extra hairs, just like that. And of course I have the Refine Radius tool, which is automatically selected if there are any areas I want to refine even more than it was before. So now that I'm happy with this selection, I'm going to output it as a layer mask, press OK, and I now have my extracted monkey sitting on his rope, which was the in focus area of the original image, which was this. And what this allows me to do is grab another background, just like this one over here, drag it over to my monkey image, press OK or yes, drag it to the background, and now my monkey is sitting in a nice tropical island. I'm going to quickly convert the background layer to a smart object, press OK, and then just to bring some focus to the monkey in the foreground, add a Gaussian blur, let's say around 7, that looks good, and press OK. Now, of course, once you add a new background to your image, you may notice a few areas that look a little bit off, like this area over here to the right on the rope. I think it's missing a little bit. So because we outputted to a layer mask, I can click on the layer mask, grab a white brush, press the B key on my keyboard, press X to switch over to my white, decrease the size a little bit, and then paint in that area of the rope that was deselected during the selection process. And again, if I want to be really nitpicky, there's a few areas over here that I can simply paint in to perfect just like that. And there we go. That is the first feature on my list, Select Focus Area, allowing you to very easily select the areas of your image that are in focus to extract them from its background. The next feature on my list is an improvement to Content Aware. I'm sure you've all been in the situation where you want to remove an object from an image using Content Aware, but the problem is it's surrounded by a lot of gradients, and Photoshop traditionally hasn't really done a great job at dealing with those gradients. As you're seeing on the screen right now, this is what it looks like in Photoshop CC, the version before Photoshop CC 2014. When Content Aware Fill is used on an area with gradients, it doesn't do the best job. But now in Photoshop CC 2014, Adobe has added a color adaptation option. Let me show you how that works. So over here to the left, I'm going to grab my lasso tool and create a very simple selection around these rocks, including the reflection, just like this, and close it out to complete the selection. Now to access Content Aware Fill, I'm going to go to the Edit menu, down to Fill, and make sure to choose Content Aware from the Use dropdown. Now you're going to notice a new option is now available, color adaptation. And when you turn that on, you're basically telling Photoshop, you know, there's a lot of gradients, there's a lot of color variation in the area that I want to remove. Deal with that. And Photoshop will now. If you press OK, Photoshop's going to do its thing, and you're going to notice Photoshop has now done a much better job at dealing with those gradients. So if we take a look at what it was in Photoshop CC, and now what it is in Photoshop CC 2014 with color adaptation turned on, it's not 100% perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better. The good news is it's not only available in Content Aware Fill. So I'm going to go back to this state right here, and this time instead of using Content Aware Fill, I'm going to switch over to my patch tool, which, as we all know, contains now Content Aware and did have adaptation in Photoshop CC. So what's the difference between the adaptation in CC 2014 and the previous adaptation? Well, previously you had options like strict, very strict, medium, loose, and very loose, but they didn't really deal with color adaptation. So now we have a drop-down menu under the gear icon with structure and color. Structure goes from 1 to 5, and that deals with the same adaptation you're used to. Very strict being number 1, and very loose being number 5. So in this case, we'll probably want number 5. And now we have color, which is color adaptation. Setting your color adaptation to 1 is telling Photoshop you're really not worried too much about the color that's surrounding these objects. But if you bump it up to 10, you really want Photoshop to recognize the gradients and do its best to blend those out nicely. So I'm going to press the return or enter to accept that. And just like you would normally do with your patch tool, you want to drag your selection to an area that you want Photoshop to sample, doing your best to line up the key lines in the photo, kind of like the horizon right here, and let go. And Photoshop's going to do its best to heal out those areas and give you a pretty decent looking result. There's a few tiny little things I would probably fix here and there, but for the most part, if we compare it to what Photoshop CC was, and then what it is now with color adaptation, that looks a lot better. Now, the third feature on my list are 2 new blurs within the blur gallery, which before used to be under the filter blur menu, but now you can find them under its own blur gallery submenu. And we have path blur and spin blur. Let me show you how spin blur works, but before I do that, I want to make sure to convert this layer into a smart object so I can edit that blur later on. And again, filter, blur gallery, and then spin blur. And as you may imagine, this will allow you to take parts of your image and make it look like it's spinning. So I'm going to grab this handle right in the middle, drag it to one of the wheels. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you guys can see what I'm dealing with. And just like with your other blurs, you have different handles which will allow you to control how the blur looks. So I can bring this in just like this to fill the whole wheel, pull that upwards a little bit, position this in the center. And now the wheel looks like it's spinning. But of course, over here to the right, we can control it even further. We have the blur angle, which we can control just like this. So if it's spinning really quickly, you can do that, or just a tiny little bit. Let's make it very quick. That looks good. And down at the bottom, we have new motion blur effects. So you can change the strobe strength, strobe flashes, strobe flash duration to really give you the effect that you're looking for. And if you're a photographer, you definitely know what this stuff means. And once you have all your settings set, you can position it just to make sure everything looks okay. Turn on high quality if you want at the top, and then press OK to apply that spin directly onto your image. And because we chose to convert this into a smart object, we have our blurs linked to our layer right at the bottom. You can easily double click on any of them to edit that blur if you want to, or you can click on the layer mask and then with a black brush, press my B key on my keyboard, you can paint out the areas that you may not want blurred. There's a little bit overspilling right over here, and that looks a little bit better. So with one simple blur, you've taken a stationary car and spun its wheels to make it look like it's in motion. And of course, you can very easily double click on this blur, go over here to the right or the left, and you can add another blur and do the exact same thing. Finally, for my last feature on my list for Photoshop CC 2014 are some improvements to the type tool. So if I press the T key on my keyboard, I can go to the top on my options bar and open up the type picker, which, don't freak out just yet, it looks different. And you're probably asking what has changed and why does it look different? Well, first of all, you have a filter right here which can filter your Typekit fonts. If you've not used Typekit and you're a Creative Cloud member, you need to start using Typekit. They have a ton of fonts, some really high quality fonts which you probably don't have on your computer right now. And if you want to quickly access Typekit, you can click on this button right here. It'll take you to typekit.com. You can sync those fonts with your website or your desktop, and they will appear right here. And if you press this filter button, you can see all of your Typekit fonts. But another thing Photoshop has done in CC 2014 is smarter search. Previously, you were able to search for font families. So for example, Helvetica, which is my favorite font. And as you can see here, here are all of my Helvetica fonts with the styles attached to it, which is really cool. So I don't have to click on the font and then switch over to the styles. But now what you're also able to do is you're able to search styles by themselves. So for example, if I'm working on a project and I know I want a nice bold black font, I can simply search black. And I will now be able to see all of my fonts that have a black style to them. And I can very easily browse these. Let's say I want Proxima Nova Black. I can click on that. It'll take me right to that font where I can simply click on the document, start typing, and it's a much quicker process. And that just about wraps up my top 4 features in Photoshop CC 2014. Of course, there are a lot more features and a lot more improvements for you guys to check out. If you're a Creative Cloud member, be on the lookout for the update, download it, and check out my other videos, iceflowstudios.com or youtube.com/iceflowstudios. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.